Welcome back to Ray's Latino Talk podcast. And for our radio listeners, welcome back to WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM, hashtag People Powered Media. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Latino Talk podcast, if you're new to the experience, is the podcast home for the best conversation on politics and today's hottest headlines from a Latino perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we can't go too far along in 2019 without bringing back the prodigal son of Ray's Latino Talk podcast, my dear homie from the great Northwest, Leo Perales. It's been too long. The prodigal son is back.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come back, and you've been doing big things. You got your own radio show over there, and it's just from me to you and to everyone that listens to this program, I am so proud of you, and I know you've been at it for a long time. I mean, I found this podcast kind of by accident, just looking for some voices that kind of talked about issues the way I think about them, and just to see you grow in this past year, it's just been amazing and an inspiration. And I tell all my friends and family to be listening to this podcast, because this is where it's at. If you want to hear how we're attacking these issues and addressing stuff, listen to Ray's Latino podcast. So again, thank you very much for letting me come back.
Oh, I appreciate it, brother. You're a big part of the experience. You know, it's happened 3 or 4 times over the years. I mean, look, to give people a sense, we're not on the radio because I was doing some traveling for work, and we're literally taping this. Leo's had a hard day at work. We were just talking about, him running around after work with kids, and he's got spring football and basketball with his kids, son, and all kind of stuff going on in his personal life, as well as his activism out in the Northwest. And then, you know, I'm literally sitting in a hotel room. It's about 10:05 in the East Coast PM. But we have as we say in Spanish, un compromiso with the Ray's Latino Talk podcast. And that's a big part of that is Leo, because, you know, I'll share with you, Leo, that 3 or 4 times during this 5 years, you know, we do this on the grind. We do this out of love. It's a labor of love here. And, you know, one of those rare moments where I doubted if anyone was listening or cared or the value of it, you reached out. And that's happened a few times. Jim Lujan, one of our great friends from LA, was kind of the first one that sort of was one of my guardian angels reminding me the importance of doing this. So we're going to keep going. And man, there is so much to talk about later in the show. We will discuss, almost as bad as blackface, the brownface controversy that's marring a historic moment in Latino cinema. We're going to go west where Leo's at to stack some 20s. We got some Western candidates that are finally throwing down. Leo, I like to see that and get your take on it. And of course, we're going to discuss, Leo, I believe we have uncovered the woman that's done more harm to Latinos since Queen Isabella sent Christopher Columbus on his merry way. That and much more later in the show. But first, I want to take the temperature of my main man, Leo Perales. You know, Leo, for those that don't know you, of course, you're a great activist up in Washington State, the great Northwest. And we haven't had a chance to catch up. You've had a lot going on there in the last several months. So why don't we just start with how are the political winds blowing? How are our friends out there feeling about our current political climate?
Well, here in Washington State, I think last time I was on, I think I talked about the prospects of perhaps seeing a trifecta here in Washington State in regards to our state government. And well, in this last election, we did get that. I went ahead and threw my hat in the ring, and I was out there fighting for things such as universal health care, revamping our education system. But I didn't win. I got my butt whooped, but it was really awesome to get out there and talk with voters and get Latinos. Don't get me wrong. You know, I ran as a candidate to bring everyone together, right? But a lot of people pulled me aside. A lot of Latinos and Latinas and said, thank you for running, because they don't really get a chance to vote for people who look like ourselves. And so it was really special for myself and my family. But again, we saw a lot of great gains, and we are just seeing great legislation come out of these sessions. In the past year, we saw our own version of the Voting Rights Act pass, and that's allowed local municipalities to reform their election systems to make them more equitable for voters in their areas. I mean, you name it. We're over here passing legislation good, sensible gun control legislation. We're seeing more money being invested in our mental health system. So to me, I mean, I guess I live in a panacea, or I live in I live in Oz. To be honest, it's really nice to live here in Washington, where we have people who are actually being held to their promises during the campaigns, and we're getting some good legislation out of it. But I do live in a red area, and a lot of these individuals around here don't like it. They don't like to see progress, but people from my political persuasion like what we're seeing.
Well, it can't be a panacea because they didn't elect you. But why don't you take a step back, Leo? Because you ran a very valiant fight. Of course, I was pulling for you, of course, from 3,000 miles away. Explain to people your run. So you ran for a seat in the Washington State Senate, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I ran
against. And you won the primary. How many people? You did win an election because you won the Democratic primary. Not a small thing. Share with people. How many people did you beat in the first round?
It was technically 3. One guy ended up having to pull out like a week or 2 prior, but. I believe his name wasn't on the ballot, but still people wrote his name in according to what I was told. So I did beat out 2 people. I beat out a libertarian activist here in the community. So I overall I did very well. I got nearly 20,000 votes here in our district. So,
nice.
Hey, that's a lot of people. Again, I went door to door, went to many events, and talked with lots of voters, and so we definitely got the message out there. Again, I live in an area probably the reddest area in the whole nation. Maybe that's a very far claim, but it really is. I mean, it's essentially a single party enclave here in southeastern Washington. I mean, we have people in our area who want to split our whole state in half. So that's where I live. But sometimes it does feel like I'm a fish out of water. But I still went out there on the political trail and put out a good progressive message.
What was the biggest learning experience you had interacting with people, knocking on doors? Obviously, there were parts of the campaign where you were sort of front of friendly audiences, particularly I'm sure during the Democratic primary. And then when you kind of get into the general game, you had to deal with people coming at you from all directions. So what was the biggest, as an activist, what was the biggest lesson that you learned from this experience?
I would say there was 2. I think the first thing is I think a lot of people underestimated me. Coming into this race, I'm not I would say I'm a well-known individual activist in the community, but there's so many people in the district, right? And I think I really did persuade some people who probably at first didn't want to vote for me, that I came in there with sensible solutions. I was able to talk about the issues, and I think I surprised a lot of people about how much I knew about the issues. Again, when you decide to run for something like this, you got to do your homework, and you got to present the facts correctly. And so I think that was, to me, that was an interesting part that from voters that I got told. I think also my age had a lot to do with that, and in relation to that, a lot of people. I was probably one of the youngest candidates to ever run for the state senate here in our area, and also I think the only Latino or person of color to probably ever run in this district, according to a lot of the records that I saw. But I didn't run on that stuff, right? I didn't want to run on identity politics, if you will. I think the other thing that came out to me was there's a lot of people who vote Republican or vote conservative that necessarily don't believe in their party right now, but that they'd rather vote party line than give Democrats more power. And that just goes in the rabbit hole of the Fox News machine and all that conservative Charlie Kirk, all that stuff, all that spew that you see over Twitter and stuff.
You're saying that they don't feel good about the Republican Party. Is it they don't feel about the party, or they don't feel good about Trump, or is that all sort of melded into one? Are you getting the impression that they don't like the fact that the Republicans in Congress aren't holding him accountable at all, or what's the dynamic about there?
I think a lot of people are seeing the damage that Donald Trump is doing to the party. I mean, he's the top, right? He's the leader. And so that's kind of bleeding down, or that's coming down to the local level now. And people still identify with a certain color or a certain letter. So they're really reevaluating, where do they belong? So I found a lot of people who decided to just become independents too. So I think the independents are starting to grow a lot more. I did see a lot of individuals of color who decided to finally come out for Democrats. Again, I mean, I did get a lot of those individuals who voted last in this last election, because we know that voting tends to go down in off-year elections. But I held steady pretty well. I mean, I didn't get, if I would have got like another 10,000 votes, it would have been neck and neck. So if 10,000 more people would have came out, it would have been a better fight. But either way, I think you're starting to see people wake up in regards to the damage that they're seeing every single day against our institutions. And so, I think Donald Trump.
What was the issue that you think clicked? Like, because I run for office similar. Years ago, I ran for the state House of Representatives in Pennsylvania. So not the state Senate, but on the House side. And so one of the things that I learned, I mean, there's a lot of personal lessons I want to ask you, but what your personal lessons were about yourself, but messaging. So, for example, when I was running years ago, when I would talk about after school programs, it didn't resonate that well. But when I talked about the tangible examples like handball courts or specific programs that resonated, particularly in the Latino neighborhoods at the time, I got a lot more traction. So what did it teach you about how you message around these issues? Because as you know, it can get very complicated. As you know, healthcare is complicated last time we checked, and, climate change, we're going to talk about later with Inslee. And some of these issues can be hard to message sometimes in a way that people understand. And oftentimes we get caught up with labels, who's progressive, who's this, who's that. So what did you learn about messaging issues during this race when you were talking to voters?
My main theme was, and my slogan was, a common sense for a change. So everything that I talked about, whether it was healthcare, whether it was education, whether it was jobs, I brought it back to a more common sense approach, and I really put that into my message. And so I would be specific. Like, for instance, we have a lot of growing industries here in the Tri-Cities area, and so a common sense approach that I would think, if we want to assist those businesses in growing, would be to get high school students who are going to be either one, going to college, or two, looking for a job, would be to work with those industries to figure out what skills they do need, and tailor perhaps some of our subject matter in our schools to fit those industries, so we can provide them with workers for their future. There's just things like that, and that took a lot of research to do, and also talking with industries to figure out what type of education we're talking about. Are we talking about skilled labor? We're talking about STEM education, and when you bring in the specifics, and they can see that you've really gone on and researched your positions, it plays better, right? They have confidence in you, and I think that's the issue is I'm seeing from locally to federal, is that a lot of people who vote are losing trust in their political representatives.
What was the biggest lesson, a personal lesson you learned from this experience?
That it's grueling. It's grueling on a family. I ran for two different campaigns in 2 consecutive years. I ran for city council, and then I told myself I wasn't going to run for a while, and then I decided to jump in this race. It's fun. I'm a persistent guy, but it does take a toll on your family life. You always have something to do. It feels like you have that monkey on your back, if I can use that expression. And it's, after I lost, it's like I looked and monkey was gone. So I've taken this time to really relax and get back to doing my Perales Report podcast, and going out there and doing a lot of activism and registering voters and doing the fun stuff that I enjoyed prior to running for office. But I'm not out. Again, I'm going to continue to bring the good fight, and I do see myself running for office here in the near future.
It can be an emotional roller coaster. You certainly, if you want to know who your real friends are, run for office, because that really is that really shows, it's an opportunity for people to really show you that they care about you, that they'll support you, what you're passionate about, regardless of how engaged they are in politics, because not everyone's going to be like us. But And then the people, I don't know if you had this experience, but people that you didn't think would care or notice were some of the most ardent supporters. So it really is it's a spiritual experience and a spiritual journey because, we often talk about the winners, and I know at some point, in this conversation, we'll talk about the AOCs and the new freshmen in Congress and the impact they've had on the dynamics and some of these new fresh faces. But we don't talk that much about the people like you and me that lost our elections or have lost, the fact we're still engaged in the community. How do we support those people to stay engaged, stay positive? And how do we support them? Because it can be a letdown. I remember, Leo, I felt really lonely right after the election. Part of it was that everyone was gone. I had, last few weeks of the campaign, I had volunteers. I had, there was just a buzz of activity and people around you and wanting to help you. And then they have the election, they move on with their lives and you're sort of left with it. So one day we need to continue that conversation. You're listening to Leo Perales, my co-host on Ray's Latino Talk podcast. When we come back, Leo, we need to talk about this woman. Like I said earlier, I believe we've identified most harmful woman to Latinos since Queen Isabella. She had a rough day on Capitol Hill, just blocks away from where I was all day. We come back here. You're listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM, and Ray's Latino Talk Podcast. Welcome back to WPPM LP Philadelphia, 106.5 FM. You can catch us not only on the radio dial at 106.5 FM, but on phillycam.org/listen, the TuneIn app, and of course, my podcast listeners. You can always listen to Ray's Latino Talk podcast anywhere you can download a podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, the list goes on and on, Spotify, YouTube. I got to give a shout. Well, I'm going to give a shout out later. Leo, someone walked up to me today. I'm looking for his business card because I want to make sure I get his first name right. And came up to me and talked about how Felipe Benitez, who's from Benitez Strategies, a prominent Latino political communication consultant in Washington, D.C. for the Latino community, comes up to me today. See, Leo says he's a fan of our podcast and he wants to figure out how to spread the word for us in marketing. So unsolicited. So there are people listening, Leo, including people in the great Northwest, our wonderful people out in your part of the world, Leo. So let people know before we talk about the worst woman that alive, as far as I'm concerned at this point, remind people they can find you on social media.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at Leo A. Perales on Facebook, on Twitter. You can follow my podcast, The Perales Report, on YouTube, on Instagram, and also on Facebook. Just go ahead and put it in there right there in the search bar. I can write up. I put on content weekly, and I look forward to putting out more good. Essentially right now what I'm doing is talking a lot about state issues. You were kind of talking about, what do the losers do after after elections? I've been staying on my opponent a lot and about her votes currently. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Well, that's good for you, brother. Yeah, no, definitely keep the conversation going with Leo. He's particularly an excellent Twitter follower. It provides a lot of information with the Perales Report on all his social media platforms. So I did want to talk about, we'll get into, I know you're chomping at the bit because you got some provocative things to talk about your governor that's dropping his name in the hat here, and the West is in the house this week with him and Hickenlooper, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I did want to talk about someone that has had, again, done great harm, particularly to Latino children and families along our southern border. Of course, I'm talking about the current Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, who had a very rocky hearing in front of the Immigration and Border Security Committee of the House Homeland Security Committee, chaired by Benny Thompson. Among some of the lowlights, she tried to distinguish the difference between the cages that many of these young people and families were incarcerated in the initial stages of the family separation crisis, between the cages the young people were put in versus her personal pets. Didn't do a good job distinguishing them. We found out that hundreds of children, approximately 250 parents, have been separated from their children since last June when they said they stopped the policy. There's apparently a very questionable pronouncement that parents were given she's acknowledged the parents were separated from their children that have been deported and are now separated by nations, but it was very under questionable circumstances. She dodged many questions. She refused to confirm that President Trump has obviously lied to us. It was a real shaky day for her, and Leo, watching this, and I've said it often last several episodes of Ray's Latino Talk podcast, that looking back, the history books are going to judge us for this issue. And I think this is going to be the dominant issue. The treatment of these young people that I think is incredibly inhumane and something that is just fundamentally un-American.
No, I agree. It was almost like it's like a car wreck, right? You see something that you shouldn't have, and you look away, but you but you continue to look at it. Just seeing the testimony back and forth, I just don't. This is probably one of the worst jobs in America. I'm extremely surprised that she has stuck around as long as she has. But one of the best headlines I saw was elections have consequences, and so this is going to be the first of many times that she's going to testify in front of Congress. I mean, they sought her out, and they said that if she didn't come voluntarily, that they were going to subpoena her. And really, if you think about it, she was in survival mode. Her people in her office were, okay, just go there, survive, get through this, here are your talking points, and that's that. But I think it's extremely disgusting when she is being asked to differentiate between the cages that these women and children are in and dogs. And she says, oh, no, well, she can't come to the grips of what she knows. But at the same time, she also kind of seems to lack like she knows what's even really going on. And the president says one thing, she says another, and you know how this is all going to get spun. We all know how this is going to get spun next week at another rally down on the border. President Trump's going to go out there and another re-election kind of style rally and just say the complete opposite, that people are just coming over the wall like in World War Z. It's crazy. But I'm glad that we finally have some balance and we're able to really speak truth to power, and we're gonna get down to the bottom of this. But I think this is one of I would say today, this alone is a nail, hopefully, in the coffin of President Donald Trump come 2020.
It's an interesting point, Leo, and that's one of the things I've been so frustrated about because, and again, that's why I've dedicated myself to really keeping this issue as a priority issue that we discuss on a weekly basis on the show, because I mean, the children essentially being tortured, and this mass incarceration. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people being held by our immigration authorities on our southern border, most of which unnecessarily. And, I wonder, do you think this does make an impact? I mean, at this point, if it hasn't impacted you on a human moral level by now, I'm very pessimistic how much it moves the needle politically.
Well, we get to see pictures, videos. I mean, we've all seen pictures and videos, but I mean, current ones. I mean, this is going to get ramped up. President Trump is making this his probably key issue in his campaign. He's going to gin up fear, right? Because that's what he likes to do. I mean, that's how he won last time. And so the Democrats need to come ready to fight. And whoever decides to run eventually here in office, we have 9-10 candidates who have put their hat in the ring. They're going to have to go toe to toe with this. And Democrats also are going to have to do some soul searching. I mean, they went ahead and gave the president $1.5 billion to build his wall, and gave everything, and we got no DACA fix. So this issue is going to be front and center, and I'm glad that we have platforms such as this where we can discuss where these candidates are going and their messaging. What's the best strategy to go from here to take down Trump in 2020?
That's such you hit on such an interesting point, Leo, because one of the things, and we talked about it on the show, but one of the things that was sort of a conversation we were all having sort of in the activist space was, on one hand, we certainly didn't want to give the president sort of this symbol of hatred, the symbol of the wall, which obviously there's border fencing and a quote unquote wall on various parts of the border at this point that have been approved by Democrats and Republicans over the years. But in this particular case, of course, it was very much kind of a symbol of hatred, a symbol of anti-Latino sentiment that fueled this campaign, but in xenophobia. But at the same time, I was talking to one of our Salvadoran brothers the other day, and he said, look, as much as I hate the idea of a wall, if they would give our DACA students permanent status and our TPS Hondureños and our Haitians and El Salvadorans, you know what El Salvadorans and Hondurans would do for that permanent status in this country? They'd build the wall themselves. They'd give me the bricks, give me the concrete, give me the cement. And so, and this is the conversation we're having internally, right? It's like, on one hand, we appreciate the Democrats' sort of stance on it, but at the same time, could there have been a deal, right? And that could have, could have been a sort of a bipartisan solution. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? And then, but also could have, even though it would have been extremely distasteful, it would have been tough medicine. But guess what? You and I, Leo, can sit around and not have to worry about being deported in the next 6 months to a year. And we got TPS holders, DACA holders in limbo. So it was an interesting debate that we were having, I think, as an activist community. And at the end of the day, the Democrats never seemed to have much of an appetite to even explore if there was a deal. Now, in fairness to the Democrats, how do you make a deal with this guy? He's so shifty, he's so unreliable. So they were in a tough spot. But that was you bring up a good point. What assurances do we have of any of the Democratic candidates that they're going to really work towards real solutions and get this issue off the table? Because we have millions of our friends and neighbors that just live in this perpetual state of between limbo and horror that they're going to be separated from their families any day.
I don't know. I've been of the school of thought for the past few years of it's no more playing nice anymore with our local representatives, especially the ones that we want to call allies, that are out there and saying that, we're out there, we are taking it to Trump. We are going to fight him on everything. But then we turn out our record numbers, we vote him in, we win the presidency, blah, blah, blah. And then we have the majority. And guess what? Nothing still gets done. And we can say that, that's essentially what happened with 8 years of President Obama. We got some good things, and then President Obama decided to, on the immigration stuff, the last second shot with DACA and that's it. But we haven't seen anything. And so
and we had to beat him up for that for 6 years, as you know. We had to beat him up for 6 years. And, 6 years is a long time. And we had to embarrass him. We had to call him the Porter-in-Chief. And we had to experience him, Mr. President, deporting more of us than anybody.
That's what I'm saying. We can't play nice anymore. Come 2020, we got to be on these candidates. We got to know what really they're going to do when they come to office. That's why we're going to get into that in stacking 20s, but I don't have a lot of faith in people like Inslee or Hickenlooper. I just don't. Not these nice guys. I'm sorry. We need that firebrand. We need someone like a Bernie, like a Warren, who can message and who's going to take it. Either way, I don't have a lot of confidence in some of these Democratic Party leaders, but we need to stay on them, and because at the end of the day, they need us more than we need them. They can be another person we can find. We can put someone else in their spot.
And I think the Latino community needs to take some lessons, and there is overlap, right? Because AOC's been on front on the Green New Deal. And so sort of pushing the envelope, calling the question, which I think is a great lesson. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little more about that toward the end of the show. But you're absolutely right. Latinos need to call. And I'm, having some conversations in DC today, in fact, about how we do call people out. Thinking about the Puerto Rico stuff, for example, right? Like Puerto Rican leaders, Latino leaders need to call all these Democratic candidates out, say, what is your plan? Will you support some of the measures that we're proposing as it relates to increasing their income tax credit, fulfilling the Medicare gap on the Medicaid reimbursement gap on the island, eliminating the Jones Act, which has put a financial cudgel on the island, controlling the mode of which a very expensive mode of which goods and services get transported back and forth from the island. And we have that in a wide range of issues, right? So what ultimately are they going to do on immigration issues? What ultimately are they going to do? Get some to understand, okay, you may be for quote unquote Medicare for all, but how does that impact the Latino community? And we're analyzing all these proposals, and just because it may sound like it covers everyone, but are we covering immigrants? Are we covering undocumented immigrants? Are we covering immigrant children with these various policies? So you're absolutely right. We got to call these people out. They got to give us specifics, and we got to put them on the record during this process. And we sure know we're going to have a long process. In a minute, when we come back from the break, we're going to get into our Stack in 20 segment. We're going to talk about some of the new candidates in the mix. And I may ask Leo, I haven't had a chance to talk to Leo about his sort of initial thoughts about the field, but I want to end this segment by reminding people again, the reign of terror that this woman who looks like a cute little blonde, Kirstjen Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, she puts a cute face on a horrific, really a policy of white supremacy as it relates to mass incarceration to these Latinos on the southern border. It just in this hearing alone in front of members of Congress today, she dodged questions about her questionable testimony last year that said the Trump administration never had a family separation policy, which is clearly a lie. She admitted she's unfamiliar, quote unquote, unfamiliar with the research indicating kids are traumatized by being separated from their parents. I don't think you need to read the New England Journal of Medicine to know that. And she struggled to explain how the border wall, what Trump is pushing for, would curtail the flow of smuggled drugs, most of which come through the ports of entry. This woman is dangerous. This woman has harmed children. 3 children have died in her care over the last year in incarceration. And again, in 30, 40 years, we're going to talk about Trump being a slime ball. We're going to talk about, all the craziness that we're dealing with. But at the end of in 30, 40 years, the historians are going to judge our country about what we did to these children. And so that's why we're going to continue to be vigilant, to hold people accountable on both sides of the aisle and call it out the way it is. This woman is so dangerous to our country. And I want to give props to Congresswoman Nanette Barragan, who was a champion on that hearing today, and talked about her personal experience, Leo, on the border, watching people who are going through legal ports of entry, being denied access and denied information on the process while on U.S. soil of applying for legal assignment, which is their legal right as people fleeing incredibly horrific conditions in the Northern Triangle of Central America. When we come back, we're going to stack some 20s, and we're going to do a West Coast style with my main man, Leo Perales. Welcome back to Raise Latino Talk podcast, and for our radio listeners, the What's Next radio program on WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5. Philadelphia radio, where it's at, Leo, no question about it. I know you're a soulful brother. You know about Philly International Radio, the stuff your dad used to listen to, your mom, the Teddy Pendergrass, the Patti LaBelle, and of course the 80s. And then the stuff you would remember, Leo, like Boys to Men, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The young boys know about Meek nowadays. When my brother was a hip-hop artist, he used to rhyme in the street. Leo, I don't know if you know this. My brother's a hip-hop artist, Army of the Pharaohs. He's performed at the Gorges and in Seattle. He's been in your part of the world many times performing hip-hop. And he used to rhyme in the street and do rap battles with Eve. You remember Eve, Leo? You know about Eve.
Eve. Yeah, I know who she is.
He used to rap and do rap battles with her and be in talent shows with Pink and be in talent shows with Music Soul Child. And Jill Scott is one of our young girls from back. She was at Homeroom, my sister-in-law. So you're talking about Philly radio has a proud tradition, and we're so proud to be a part. My dad was on radio in Philadelphia many years, so very proud to be part of this tradition. And, of course, we've always been worldwide with our podcast, again, talking to people in D.C. today that really appreciate the work that we're doing here. And, of course, they were wondering, whatever happened to that guy with the real sexy voice, Leo Perales? I said, well, matter of fact, he's back with us. Leo, thank you for joining us, brother, as always. And you know what? Hold on. People got to hear this. Hold on. Oh, what was that? What was that? We're stacking 20s again on Raise Latino Talk podcast. This is the segment where we break down what's going on with the 2020 presidential field. That is my favorite segment of the show. And, of course, we don't just stack 20s metaphorically. Every candidate that declares on both sides of the aisle, we make a donation to Love Shouldn't Hurt, an organization recently founded by a great friend of the show, Christina Vega, an organization that supports Latina survivors of domestic violence and helps them through that painful but ultimately a journey that many of our folks get out of, and she's spreading the word, helping a lot of women and men too. And so we want to be here to support Chrissy and whatever in her endeavor. But Leo, it's so appropriate you're on the show this week because the eyes of the political world are up in the Northwest. We'll talk about my man in Colorado in a minute, but the man that made some headlines in this whole mix was Your own governor, Washington Governor Jay Inslee, he's fashioning himself as the climate change candidate. And besides being a champion of climate change, Inslee has quite an impressive legislative record. As governor, successful implementation of paid family leave, increase in the minimum wage, the legalization of the wacky tobacco, marijuana, a moratorium on the death penalty, state net neutrality, support of the state public option, and a leading role in suing the administration over the Muslim ban. Guy has a record of service, successful legislation, has an expertise in arguably the most important issue we're dealing with, because if we don't have a planet, there's nothing else to talk about. So my question to you is, Leo, is what's not to like about your intrepid governor, Jay Inslee?
When you're just rolling through all the accomplishments that Mr. Inslee has really gotten.
That's your main man. I'm trying to hook you up. You guys are often forgotten about in this mix. I'm trying to take care of my people up in Washington State.
I just can't help but think that, when I saw those things happen, like the Muslim ban lawsuit, that, what exactly is this guy's game plan? And we heard these inklings over the past couple of years that he's thinking about running for office again. As a person who's ran for office himself and who's tied into the local parties, you hear these things from the party elders and stuff. Hey, Jay's looking for a run, and he's been running his whole life. Again, he's been a great governor. I just don't think climate change and making it the focus of a campaign is. I don't want to use the word sexy, but I mean it was barely mentioned in the last presidential cycle. I mean, I think it may have been mentioned once. I don't know if making it the focus of a presidential campaign is smart, but I guess it's a way to contrast yourself with other candidates, perhaps. But in my opinion, he does have a leg up on this. I mean, he's wrote in books. He just passed legislation on the day that he announced. He passed. We went ahead and passed two bills. One in the Senate, it was a clean power bill, and then we also passed another bill in the House. To reduce the use of hydrofluorocarbons, carbons. So I mean, he's done amazing things, but I don't know if he's going to even make it on the stage. Right after he announced, he was polling at 0%. So only time will tell. He's been getting some major airplay. He was on The View this past week, so he's making his rounds. I don't know if you knew this, though. There is a petition for him to resign, given that he is running for office. I've never heard of such thing. Other former governors have ran for office or ran for the presidency, and I've never heard of people saying,
"Yeah, governors run all the time, and people, or elected officials run all the time, and some people don't like it, but at the end of the day, it's a pardonable sin." I'll say this: that I don't know a ton about Jay Inslee. I know I like what I see. It seems like he has a good record. I think the fact that I think he can certainly even further highlight the climate change conversation. It's a potential way for him to sort of differentiate himself from the pack. And as you know, politics, the winds change, right? I mean, you're absolutely right. 2016, nobody was talking about climate change. I'm literally sitting in Washington, D.C. I talked about climate change all day because I'm here for a convening, and I'm meeting with federal officials on the Hill discussing the Latino perspective. So as you know, and of course, AOC is, with her messaging around the Green New Deal and with Merkley. And so there's a conversation about it that's happening, an unprecedented level of interest in it, relatively speaking. So that between that and healthcare, which has a very crowded space, I think there is a possibility for him to fashion himself a role in this conversation. What should people know, for people that don't know much about this guy? His long shotness aside, of course, he has to prove he can raise a lot of money, and he has very little name recognition outside of your part of the country. But what should people know about your governor, Jay Inslee, as they're looking at him as a potential presidential candidate?
Again, I'm trying to think of like a political consultant, or I don't know, as a guy who's looking at who can,
or just what should we know about him, brother? Don't prejudice it. What should we know about him? What do you think about him?
He's so far right now, as far as I know, he's the only governor that has put his hat in the ring. He was the head of the Democratic Governors Association, so he's gone around the country raising money. So that and all of his achievements in the past, 6-7 years as our governor, again, he's done a great job. Again, I just don't think, like you said, he has the name recognition to blunt the force of the Betos who's not running yet, or the Bidens, or the Warrens, or or Mr. Sanders. In my opinion, if you asked me, Leo, I'll give you $10,426. Who is going to win the nomination? I'll go ahead and say it. I think it's Bernie Sanders to lose. That's what I think. Problem is, I hope that it just doesn't become a coronation. That's the way I look at it. Who's my dark horse? If you had to ask me, the darkest horse I would say would be Mr. Castro. But I think if Beto decides to run, I think it can be Beto versus Bernie Sanders. But I don't know about Mr. Biden. Again, I'm trying to play with it. I'm putting together an episode here. I'm really doing my research.
Let me ask you a question. Who do you like at this point in terms of who's out there? Who are you looking at? Have you declared someone you're supporting, Leo? What are you thinking personally? Besides your prognostication, is there anyone you like? Or
I want to keep my amateur journalistic integrity intact, but.
All right, so you're not publicly declared. Okay, well, you're a big time Democratic operative. So I was just curious. About that. Okay, yeah, and I haven't either. Not because I'm trying to weasel out of it like you are. I just honestly just haven't decided. I'll say this: I think you and I are looking at this the same way, and we'll talk about the other guy that jumped into the race in a second. But I mean, look, Inslee's got a lot to prove. He has a good track record. People. When I was a kid, he would have been very attractive in terms of people liked governors. We didn't used to elect senators much and random people like the president, but used to be like governors and people like, people that had run things. So in another world, he kind of has a lot of Gary Hartnum, I think, from, in the old days in terms of that kind of Western.
Don't say that.
But I'm saying before the scandal, kind of that Western guy that had done a lot and kind of similar, kind of, some analogy there. But you're right. I mean,
did you see that movie? By the way, did you see that movie?
Absolutely. It was very good. Very interesting.
The one that just came out. It was really good.
Interesting. Well, I remember Gary Hart back in the days. That was a big disappointment because that cost the Democrats the presidency as far as I'm concerned in those days. But getting back to Inslee, so, look, I mean, it is tough. I mean, the Northwest geographically, a lot of people, it's hard for people to kind of connect with folks in that part of the world. He's got a lot of people. He's got to introduce himself to a whole lot of the country. There's bigger names, there's sexier names. He really is relying on not a ideological movement like Bernie or sort of a mega rock star like Beto or Kamala. He really is relying on sort of people grabbing onto this climate change message and his record of accomplishment. But he has he's raised some money. He's got a super PAC that's put $1 million buyout in Iowa. A commercial on my basic cable here in Washington. He just showed a commercial of him, so he's already putting some cash out there. There's a little money. Last time I heard, there's a little money out in Seattle. So I think he's got a chance to raise some money. And look, I hope people get to know who he is because he has accomplished some things. I think he's bringing something to the table. But a lot of these people have to prove a lot to us, and including the other Western governor that jumped in the race this week. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper jumps in the race, calling himself the pragmatic conservative, business-friendly progressive. He's got, a pragmatic progressive, business-friendly progressive. He's really trying to play the middle. He's really trying to bring the country together. He's very much like Booker. He's very concerned about the division in the country, so he's trying to bring an empathetic perspective. He accomplished quite a bit as Colorado governor, of course, as the mayor of Denver. Expanded Medicaid in the state, passed background checks, worked on gun control out there. He's got an interesting background. We share something in common, Leo, because you have a Washington guy jumping into the race, and I got a Philly guy. John Hickenlooper, born and raised in the Philadelphia area. So you just got a Philly guy who moved out to Denver years ago to open a quote-unquote Philly-style sports bar. So this is a Philly guy, if anything. And, how he campaigned when he ran for mayor of Denver? To talk about the importance of public transportation, he campaigned on a bicycle. That's how he got attention. He campaigned all over Denver on a bicycle. So he's an interesting character. You have any thoughts about John Hickenlooper, Leo?
I don't want to get in hot water, but the only word that came to mind when he was running was vanilla. He may be the most vanilla candidate or choice right now, and I don't know. I mean, I look at the way things are. And I work hard to change things that I would like for them to be. And the way things are right now, I don't know if a Kumbaya guy is going to win. I really don't. I've read a couple pieces that he wants to bring the country together. There's no better time than now. I'm not sure that he's going to have the gravitas or what is it, the energy, right? Donald Trump said it last time, low energy, to go against someone like a Donald Trump. I think, like I said earlier, you do need a firebrand. You need to fight fire with fire. Again, he has great accomplishments, gun control bills and all that stuff, expanded Medicaid, like you said. But I just don't think that's going to do it. I really don't. And I think where we're seeing the Democratic Party going right now, going more further to the left, just like how we saw in the last election, I would say the Republican Party went far, far to the right. I think that's what's going to happen in 2020. So, I think the party represents more people who look like Mrs. Cortez and not Mr. Hickenlooper. Is the way I look at
it's interesting. I don't know if you the 528 podcast they break down the candidates in these categories, and it's really funny because they referred to Kamala Harris and like the coastal elite types. Inslee wasn't in the race at that point, but they refer to them as like the Warrens and the Kamala Harris and the Bookers, like the wine candidates, the wine drinking candidates, and then they refer to Biden. If Sherrod Brown runs and Klobuchar and like that crew is like the beer drinking candidates, and then they refer to Hickenlooper and Beto as the craft beer candidates. So it's really funny. So it's really hysterical. But you're right, because I just had a very interesting dinner with a group of progressive environmental activists. And I think we're going through schizophrenia, Leo, Democratic supporters and people that want this gentleman to, like just anybody but Trump, right? Is that, I don't, how are we going to, where's the congruence in everything you just said? We want a fighter. We want someone that's probably not vanilla, pushing for a bolder agenda, which obviously on some level kind of leans more progressive or overtly progressive. And then we struggle with this concept of, that's the person kind of we want, but is that the person that can win? And so I guess my question is, which one is it? Or how do you think it's going to play out, Leo, where we're going to come to this answer? Because from my perspective, I would say that the answer will come out of the best candidate to beat Trump is going to be the best candidate, right? So regardless of ideology, regardless of personality, the person that grabs our attention ultimately is going to be the best candidate, right? So, but there's so much built into the cake of that, right? So what do you think ultimately, how do you think that ultimately this is going to shake out in terms of the type of candidate that will emerge?
Okay, I was thinking about this. I was trying to think of a funny, analogy or whatever to say and what I'm going to be putting out there. I'm sure you remember the movie Back to the Future, right? Marty McFly.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Okay. Remember Mr. the older McFly, and then you had Biff. We don't need a Mr. McFly. We need a Biff right now. We don't need a nice guy. Okay, if I had a daughter, I want her to date someone like Biff, who's going to protect her and get things done. Not a Marty McFly who's going to get knocked out. I'm telling you.
Well, that sounds like you sound like you're a Biden guy then, because I don't think any of the other candidates really fit that I don't even think like Beto, who, by the way, I think, as the more I talk to activists, he hasn't declared yet, but Beto, a lot of people like Beto, and that's it. We'll get there when he declares, but I don't see any of them other than Biden kind of fitting that Biff vibe. I mean, who else do you think
I have nicknames for
some of these other
candidates,
folks can fit that description?
Some of them come off bad. Oh yeah, I have nicknames. So Bernie Sanders, I have him as no longer the dark horse.
We'll give him a good one.
To me, he would be a older Biff. Kamala Harris, I have her as the professional.
I agree with that.
Right, the kind of she sips wine and all that stuff. I have Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, I like these.
I have her nickname, and I hope this doesn't come up bad to lots of people. Maybe Hillary 2.0. I only say that. I only say that. I say that because.
You're not the first person that's told me that, my man. A lot of people are like,
baggage,
she's like Hillary.
Baggage. I mean,
she's like
already,
Hillary. And I'm like,
been hit by
really that.
But she already has a nickname.
It's tough, man. It's tough. What baggage?
Right.
The Native American thing? Come on. Well, so Trump's a racist on her. He's racist to Native Americans, and that's her baggage? I mean, look, she didn't handle the whole thing well at all. But white people don't handle race well. So on some level, I mean, we've got to be, I'm not saying understanding of it, but But that is sticking in people of color's craw. I mean, she's not starting on a good foot with that. There's no question about it. Leo, we could talk all day about these presidential things. There really should be. I should do a separate show just on the 2020 stuff because I could talk about it all day. I love it. I love talking about all these candidates. A little tip before we take this next break and we'll get into these other topics. I don't know if you noticed, Leo, but the head of the Latino Victory Front, Cristobal Alex, a guy who has who spent some time in Washington State. He went to the University of Washington Law School. He's got a lot of ties in your part of the world. Great friend of ours, an El Paso guy. Recently announced that he was going to leave being the executive director of the Latino Victory Fund. And there was wide speculation about what he was doing. Presumably, he's an El Paso guy, so there was speculation that he was going to jump on and be one of the senior members of the Beto O'Rourke campaign. He's very close professionally to Maya Harris, Kamala Harris's sister. So there was conversation about him possibly jumping on the Kamala campaign. But Politico is reporting this evening, Leo, that he's going to be a senior on the top senior staff of the Biden campaign. So that not only means that my man Cristobal is going to be in a very good position and one of the few Latinos that's ever had an opportunity to be a senior member of a campaign. But it also means implicitly Biden's running. So very exciting stuff. And when Biden officially runs, we'll have plenty of time to talk about him and him channeling Biff. When we come back, Leo, we got to talk about this brown face. Unfortunately, a little bit about this brown face controversy and some of the other headlines you've been thinking about. And you're listening to Leo Perales and Ray Collazo on Ray's Latino Talk podcast and the What's Next radio show on WPPM LP Philadelphia. And we'll be right back. You listen to WPPM Philadelphia, 106.5 FM, people-powered media. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Ray Collazo, and it's the What's Next radio show on WPPM. And, of course, for the loyal podcast listeners, Ray's Latino Talk podcast. This is the home for the conversations going on in the when you're playing dominoes, when you're putting down a few modelos, playing soccer with you're watching your kids play soccer on the weekends, hanging out at the quinceañera. The conversations happening about the politica, what's going on with these hot issues, is happening here in Ray's Latino Talk podcast. Leo Perales, it's so good to have you back, brother. How's it been for you so far?
Cold. It's cold. I mean, we've had snow on the ground here for 2.5 weeks. I went to Vegas for a little bit, came back, and there was even more snow. We're just getting hit hard, but global warming's not real. Some guy hit me in the face with a snowball and said, "Look, there's snow everywhere." So I at least get some humor in over here in my neck of the woods.
Yeah, but I know it's warming you up having this spicy conversation on Ray's Latino Talk podcast. Leo's been a great conversation. Of course, we talked about the 2020 elections, the evilness that is this administration as it relates to Latinos and Homeland Security, and just generally catching up with Leo about politics and what's happening in this world. Leo had a valiant run for the Washington State Senate, so he's sort of our eyes and ears out in the great Northwest. I wanted to hit a couple quick headlines. Before we get off the air, I did want to note, Leo, I've got a real spicy, real chismoso. A juicy cheeseman that I'm connected to. So we're going to get into some of the lighter stuff, but quickly. We do have to talk about this brown face controversy that we're having to deal with here in Latin amongst our Latino brothers and sisters. Mexican TV personality Jessica Rosales posted a photo a few weeks ago on Instagram featuring herself and an actor posing as director Alfonso Cuarón, and she basically was posing as Yalitza Aparicio, of course, the star of Roma, She was Oscar nominated. The movie won for Best Foreign Film in the Oscars. The pic was basically of her portraying, mocking, impersonating Yalitza in brown face with a prosthetic nose, brown makeup, and other exaggerating indigenous features. This is the kind of stuff, rightfully so, she's been clapped back on the social media, and particularly U.S. based Latinos have been stirring up the conversation around colorism and racism in the Latino community as sort of the latest example. I know, Leo, throughout my life, a lot of times Spanish language television was sort of further backwards as it related to race relations and gender roles. And so this is the latest example that we have a long way to go.
Yeah, it really, when I saw this story, again, doesn't surprise me. And it really does feels like these stories like this come in, I guess, come in groups, or what am I trying to say here? They just come like they come all at once. A couple of weeks ago we had the Northam stuff, and it really is just disgusting. And I can't believe we're still having to deal with this in 2019. Because as a person like myself, I'm a pretty dark guy. In the middle of summer, I get extremely dark, and really it just puts a kind of a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. It makes me feel like, is this how people view me? I mean, do I get made fun of about how dark I get? My wife she's a dark. I mean, we're indigenous, and she's beautiful, and that's my problem with it, is that they're making fun of individuals that are beautiful in their own right. Everyone's unique, and this takes me back to what was a year ago on the Love and Hip Hop kind of thing, when that one guy was making fun of
Amara La Negra. Yeah, that's right.
Making fun of her and stuff like that. It's just, what are you talking about?
Yeah, she's one of the great sex symbols of our era. She's doing her thing, and she's inspired a lot of people to embrace and feel good about their Afro-Latino background. And, we've always talked about identity on this show, and I've gotten from people, whether they were Afro-Latino activists or indigenous activists, without in so many words, like, well, why do you care so much, Ralph? Not that I'm white, certainly, but I'm not. I don't, and I have indigenous roots, but I'm not as dark as you are. I don't think anyone will consider me a black person. And I'm like, that's precisely why we have to talk about it, because, and it's even within the Latino community, we have to be allies to people, to our indigenous and African populations and our roots, because God, and this, for example, this is the bottom line. Eva Longoria, of course, the celebrated actress, megastar, the chairwoman of the Latino Victory Fund, very politically involved. I've heard her tell this story many times, where she never felt attractive as a child, as a young woman, because she was the shortest and darkest skinned daughter in the family. And so she would be made fun of for being ugly because she was shorter and darker. And this is one of the most beautiful women in the world. So if one of the most beautiful women in the world can be brought up with this kind of self-esteem issues and attacked for her ethnic look, regardless of how beautiful it is, we have a long way to go. So that's identity is something, and honoring all of who we are and supporting the Black community and their civil rights struggles and other disenfranchised communities is going to be a big part of the show. Before always going to remain vigilant on that. Before I get into my chisme, Leo, which is going to blow you away, what else is on your mind, brother, on this edition of Raise Latino Talk podcast?
I've been, again, since after the election, I've been able to kind of breathe and really follow a lot of stories. And I try to be present in my kind of fortune teller type of mentality, especially in regards to these elections. And so I think one thing that has really interested me has been all this AOC backlash. It seems like she has tired many Democrats here in the party with her no bullshit mentality. She's even saying that if you don't do what what the party's essentially gravitating towards, that we're going to primary you. So what is your feelings on that? I haven't talked to you in a while. I haven't heard you guys talk about this backlash here on the program here in a minute.
Well, it's an interesting point. The long and short of it is that I think she said it best. She was on Desus and Mero the other day, and she said the bottom line is that to make real change, you're going to have sharp elbows. You got to do the hard things. And so, in the same way that, Republicans in Congress and this president to some degree are basically held hostage by the radical right in their caucus because they mobilize and they hold their, even though I think it's a sick perspective, it's still their perspective, and they hold their elected officials accountable. The left and the people that really want to get real things done. You talked earlier on the show about getting real things done and not pussyfooting around it and not, sort of stringing us along when it comes to immigration. Look, you can say what you want. You may disagree with some of her positions, but she's going on the right track. We can quibble about, and I think the Green New Deal, that particular document was sort of dropped sloppily, and they probably should have cleaned it up a little bit before they released it. But the bottom line is that that's the direction we have to move in. And as she said on television the other day, well, if you got a better idea, put it out there. But right now, all you're doing is criticizing our vision for it without coming up with an alternative. Same for healthcare, same for the immigration crisis, same for ethics in government and trying to have more of a democracy here. So, look, I mean, I'm not as left as AOC is. I'm not particularly on a personal level. Don't fashion myself as like a socialist. And, I think fundamentally we want to have a capitalist society. But at the end of the day, I think she's moving the needle. And guess what? If these people do bullshit and don't do real things, you said it earlier, Leo, it's not that AOC is doing this in a vacuum. She's responding to a movement in this country of people that increasingly, even though they're progressive, don't identify with the Democratic Party, increasingly are tired of both sides of the aisle, and increasingly want things done. In the case of the young generation, feel a sense of urgency because between the increased wealth gap and climate change being a real threat to their futures, young people don't got time for this anymore. So I think she's really responding to a wave. And at the end of the day, it's hardball, my friends, as Chris Matthew would say. So if they don't want to be primary, step up your game.
No, I agree. And I don't want to take Hillary Clinton's slogan, but I am with her. I just wanted to know, over in your neck of the woods, what people are thinking. Because again, I do hear some rumblings over here. They're like, I think she needs to calm down a little bit. She's new. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell you something. Look, let's keep it real. I'm gonna keep it. I almost should say this low, but look, even amongst the Latino, outside of like elected officials and stuff, like even amongst the Latino leadership and stakeholders, they don't know what to do with her. Let's keep it real because, most of them are not, kind of like overtly progressive. Look, at not only you could be Latina, but being a Bronx Puerto Rican woman, that's extra. So, her style, like I got cousins in the Bronx Puerto Ricans. That's a whole different thing than just being Puerto Rican. So she's extra. And that's a whole different, personality, persona. And so they just look, she's the most influential Latino in U.S. politics, period. I don't care. That may change in 6 months. It may change in a month, but that's who she is right now. So, the rest of us got to understand. And I think we need to make every effort to work with her, support her when we agree with her. And look, I don't agree with everything she stands for. Nobody's going to agree with everything. But the thing that she has, which I think is she is very, I don't want to say a symbol because that sounds vapid, but she is very much a vessel for the young, dynamic, diverse, very Latina, but beyond that, diverse women, particularly in the millennial generation, that are really that are going to lead this country out of this abyss. There's these young Latinos, these young women that are progressive, that understand intersectionality, that are smart, that are hardworking, that she very much is a vessel for them. And so I don't want to be on this other side of those women because those are the women that we need to let step up and lead and have more of a platform. So, and that's what I'm hearing from every day. The older people and the people that are a little more studs in tradition or party politics are like, I don't know. And then these young Latinas that I talk to, they're like, go AOC. So guess what? I'm with them. So you want to say you were her, and I'm cool with that, but I'm with them as well. So in the last thing, Leo, before we wrap up this Dish Race Latino Talk podcast, I got to give you some real good cheese, man, bro. Real good stuff. So your parents would know there's a lady, you may not know who she is. There's a lady who was in the 70s and 80s was a big-time Latin pop star. Her name, she was real big with power ballads, like somewhere between like a Bette Midler to a Madonna. Somewhere in there is a woman who was a pop star of the 70s, 80s. Her name's Ednita Nazario, who's one of the biggest Puerto Rican pop female singers we've ever had, right? So Ednita's in her early 60s, still is a big star, still living particularly in Puerto Rico and in Latin America. And so she recently, there was an expose on the big television station in Puerto Rico yesterday. All the news in Puerto Rico yesterday was that she has a new man in her life. She was married a million years. She got divorced. And she has a new man in her life that's over 20 years younger. expose, pictures, videos, initial interviews. She admits that she's got this new young guy in her life. It's the big news in Puerto Rico. It's in People en Español's website, the front of People en Español's website. Leo, it's my first cousin, Omar Gonzalez. Yes, my cousin is in Anita Nazario's new concubine. And let me tell you, people are like, well, you're close to your cousin. Everybody got cousins. He's second cousin. Let me tell you, when he was a baby, his parents lived with us in Philadelphia. So he's like my third little brother. And every time I go to Puerto Rico, that's who I hang out with. We're very close. I was with him in Puerto Rico in November. He's a U.S. Army man. So I love hanging out with him. He's a great guy. He's traveled the world. He served our country for highest service. And he sort of hinted at it that he had something going on when I saw him a few months ago. And it turns out he's dating one of the big stars on the island. So let me tell you, Leo, I am in the middle of one of the great gossipy, juicy stories in Puerto Rico right now. It's very exciting.
2 words. Concert tickets. Are we going to get hooked up or not?
Well, if you get to Orlando, I don't think she gets many gigs nowadays outside of Florida, East Coast, and Latin America. Maybe if you were in Mexico City or something, but keep an eye for Anita. She still performs. She still has a great voice. And you got a YouTuber, brother. So I want you to look her up and send a couple links to your mom and see if she remembers Anita back in the days with her ballads. And I bet you your mom's a fan of hers. So you could tell her the story about how you've got this connection with her. It's very exciting. It's very exciting for your family to be like in like the gossip pages. It's very cool.
That is one of the weirdest stories I've heard today.
Yeah, it's something, brother. I'm going to text you the links. It's very exciting. Very cool stuff. But Leo, anything else on your mind? And also let people know where they can find you on social media.
Man, just so much, but I'll keep it short and sweet. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook. Just type it in right there in the search bar, Leo Perales. You can also type in there the Perales Report. It comes right up. You can find a lot of the good content. I'm always sharing very good news stories from Ray's Latino podcast to Latino Rebels. I'm going to save some of my stories for the next one, but please be active, be engaged, stay informed. Everyone out there.
That's a great way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you, Leo, brother. Definitely support the Perales Report. Follow Leo Perales on social media. He's my main man, a great friend. And Leo, I meant it. We got to figure out a way for me to get out there, you to get somewhere in the middle of the country so we can connect. San Diego might be a good idea. I'll be out there in August. Maybe that might be the meeting spot, but we definitely got to connect soon. You're a great friend and appreciate all your support always for the program. And thank you so much for listening to Ray's Latino Talk podcast. Subscribe, download, let people know about this, support the movement, give us a review, iTunes, anywhere you can download a podcast. And of course, for our radio listeners, thank you so much for listening to WPPM LP Philadelphia 106.5 FM. People powered media. Continue to engage, and as Leo said, make your voice heard. Peace.